Hey there, it's Shauna. I hope you're doing great. Welcome to your weekly astrology forecast for January 8th. So this week is all about adventures of the heart and soul. And so I'm titling that for this week because you may feel like your heart and soul are having some adventures this week. It may be kind of intense. So I'm excited to share the astrology of this week with you, and then I have 3 tips for you to have an amazing week. So first thing that's happening this week is we have kind of like this pile up of planets in the sign of Capricorn. We have the Sun, Venus, and Pluto, which will all meet in Capricorn this week. And this is important because the Sun and Venus are related to what it is that we're drawn towards, what it is that we're attracted to, that's Venus. And then the Sun is how we identify ourselves. The Sun shows where our focus is throughout the year. And then in your birth chart, the Sun is your ego, it's your identity. It's how you just identify yourself in the world, how you like fit into different roles. And so with these two coming into contact with Pluto, there's a certain level of depth and intensity and possibly something needing to change. Pluto is about the process of death and decay, and then the creation that follows. So this is often not a super pleasant process because as humans we don't really like change. We like things to be predictable and to stay the same. And so the thing with Pluto is it symbolizes a time when something needs to decompose so that something new can grow. And because this is all happening in what's called a conjunction, they're all together at one point. And we have the last quarter phase of the moon in the sign of Libra. Last quarter phase and the conjunction are both more internal kind of energy, and it can be more subtle. So I would imagine that this is less of an external circumstance that you're working out, and it may just be more of an internal feeling where you're looking at what it is that, especially in the sign of Capricorn, like what is it that you're committed to? What is it that you're working towards? What does success mean to you, especially success in your roles and your relationships? How do you identify yourself as a successful person? And all of these things. So again, this happens earlier in the week, so it may feel kind of intense, and I would just say that whatever it is that's coming up, if it feels like something needs to change, it probably does. And that doesn't mean that you need to have it all figured out right now, but whenever we have an aspect with Pluto, it's always very helpful to just be real with whatever your experience is, instead of trying to deny it or to make it go away. If you're feeling the feelings, feel the feelings. So the other thing that's happening this week is we have Mercury conjunct Saturn, also in Capricorn. And so Mercury is our thought process. It's how we make sense of things intellectually. And then Saturn is commitment and devotion, and also limitation and restriction. Saturn really helps us to create a form. And so with this, I'm wondering if we may be feeling kind of like a more practical and somber tone around, especially around the things that we're committing ourselves to with the new year. And this may be where kind of like the rubber hits the road in a certain way with things, where you're like, okay, does this thing that I was really excited about on the first of the year, does that still work for me? Or like, how do I make that work? And what's practical? This is very focused on practical and just being real with yourself. And the thing is too, because we have so much Capricorn energy, there can be a more somber tone to the week. Capricorn is notorious for being more serious. It doesn't have to be that way. But I would say that if you're feeling more serious or somber, or even kind of like melancholy, it's helpful to find a way to channel that. So this is a lot of, again, because we're in the waning cycle, the waning phase of the moon, it is more internal process. So I would allow for that. Any kind of like journaling or reflection, that kind of thing can be very helpful this week. And then the last thing that's happening towards the end of the week is we have the Sun and Venus squaring Uranus. And so this is a little bit different. Pluto and Uranus are both about change. They both call for something to transform in some way. And I know that's a very cliche form, transformation, but it's true. There's a certain level of change that is needed, especially around maybe your roles, how you identify yourself, which is the Sun, and Venus, which is relationships. Relationships, values, and then what it is that we're attracted to versus repulsed by. Like there's something there that how we align ourselves with what it is that we enjoy that is changing. And Uranus is about changing the system. Uranus is about doing things differently for you, or differently from your social circle, differently from the social norms of what's expected from you. And so later, I'm thinking the progression might be something where you're like feeling really intense earlier in the week and you're processing what it is that is true for you. That's more the Sun, Venus, Pluto. And then later in the week, maybe where you're like, oh, okay, I know what works and I know what doesn't, and then this is what needs to happen. And maybe you don't know exactly what needs to happen, but I think later in the week, there's more of a sense of openness towards whatever it is that you're clarifying in your life. So that being said, I have 3 tips for you to really make the most of this week. The first tip is to give your body some love. And I say this because we have Pluto and Uranus active this week, especially with personal planets, the Sun and Venus. And so I find that when these 2 planets are active, there's a lot of change sometimes, and sometimes it's just internal change where we don't even realize it as it's happening. But in that process, it's very helpful to be grounded into your body. It's helpful to move and to nourish yourself and to like feel all of the things that are happening inside of your body, even at a subtle level. So give your body some love. What does that look like? That looks like any kind of movement practice that feels good, any kind of restorative body work that feels good. Make sure that you're eating well. Make sure that you are moving in some way, that because emotional energy, it is processed through when we physically move our body. Everything's all connected. So that is tip number 1, to give your body some love. Tip number 2 is to keep it real this week. And that's because we're in Capricorn season, so Capricorn likes to keep it real, but also we have that Pluto aspect earlier in the week. And so whenever Pluto is around, there is a call to be real with yourself and to be real with what works, what doesn't work, and how it is that you feel, no matter how inconvenient those feelings or intuitions are for you. It's important to listen to yourself. And then before I give you tip number 3, I have a quote that I would like to share with you. So this is from Tori Amos, who is the singer-songwriter. If you don't know of her music, she's amazing. And look her up immediately after you watch this video. So she is the person that we're featuring on this week's episode of the Feminine Principle podcast. And she has like this very Plutonian, Uranian kind of vibe to her. She's very deep, very intense, and a very strong presence. So she's a great symbol for this week. And she actually, her music is very rich and raw, and you wouldn't expect that she actually grew up in a very Christian household. Her father was a preacher. And so in this quote, she's talking about that. In Christian households, this is the dark side. A woman aligned with her spirituality and her sexuality was a very threatening thing. It was choose one or the other. So my whole life has really been about integrating those. And so I found this and I liked it a lot because I feel like we might be doing a little bit of that. We might be integrating how it is that we feel like a good person spiritually, and then how it is that we identify sensually and sexually as well. Like how that sense of purity and alignment can come together with the part of you that's maybe more primal. And a lot of this is like the Uranus and Pluto coming together with the Sun and Venus. So So that being said, tip number 3 is to keep it honest. And so I don't mean honest to other people, I mean honest with yourself. Like, what is it that's really important to you? We're starting out a fresh year, and we're really starting out a new cycle with the Sun and Venus meeting Pluto this week. So Pluto calls for honesty with yourself at the most deep and internal level. And as I'm saying this, only you know what that means for you. It's such a personal thing, and it's different for everyone, and it changes over time. So notice what is coming up for you this week, and pay attention. So that's your weekly horoscope for this week. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you did, please share it with a friend, because I like to get these messages out to as many people as possible. And then if you want to get deeper into this astrology, much more than I can on this video, you can listen to the Feminine Principle podcast. It's the podcast that I co-host with my astro friend Mel of Energetic Principles. It's called the Feminine Principle Podcast, Astrology for Authentic Living, and we go over all of these transits in much more detail with quotes and tarot cards that Mel pulls, and some really fun, it's just fun time. So I'll have links down below for you to listen to that on iTunes, Podbean, or even YouTube. And then lastly, for Sunday, this coming Sunday on the 14th, I'm hosting a moon circle. So I'll have, that'll be in Encinitas in San Diego. So if you're in the area, I would love to meet you. I'll have the info down below. You can check that out on Meetup, and it is Sunday the 14th at 7:30 p.m. and it's in Encinitas at Gather Encinitas. So that's all for now. I'm wishing you an amazing week, and I'll talk to you soon. Namaste.